Good morning to all of our friends, our colleagues, all of our guests, and of all of our speakers that will share their thoughts with you this morning. I really, on behalf of Agri SA, would like to welcome you all, and I trust that you'll find this meeting very insightful. Obviously, this is not a once-off discussion. We have a very good specialist here today, and please, via Agri SA, you're more than welcome to follow up with them if there's uncertainty around us. So who am I? I'm Christo van der Rede. I am the Executive Director at Agri SA. My father wished me to become a Springbok player. Sadly, though, I ended up in agriculture. But maybe one day that dream I will be able to realize. Then, just to give you some brief background, we've had a lot of confusion around Agri BEE, what it means, how it impacts on you as the farming community. At the same time, what are the positives that one can take out of that, who actually can benefit from it. So that will be the background to the discussion this morning. Then a few house rules that I've been asked to convey. All mics must remain on mute. Question on the speaker's presentations will be opened during the last hour. Questions can either be asked verbally during the Q&A session or in the chat box during the webinar. Now, who are our speakers this morning? We've got Phil Bowles. Phil Bowles is the Manager for Enterprise Development at WinPro. Then we have Emily Hendricks. She is the member of the BE Chamber. And I'm very proud. Emily has been my colleague many, many years ago. I'm not going to give away my age, but we were colleagues together at a primary school. Then we have Ilse Meiberg-Leenderts. Ilse is a Senior Manager at the PPCEB. So may I start right away with the conversation this morning. Once more, welcome to all of our guests. And I see that we've got quite a number of people online. So let me ask Phil to introduce himself. And Phil, please do your presentation. And after you are done, we will then obviously introduce Emily as well as Ilse later on. So ladies and gentlemen, sit back, enjoy your coffee or tea. I think it's too early in the morning for anything else, or a glass of water. But please stay with us, stay online, and learn more about what BE means and how it can benefit or how it can impact negatively on the sector. Over to you, Phil.
Thank you very much, Christo, for the introduction. I just want to make sure that everyone can see the presentation and then also that everybody can hear me.
We can, Phil. Thank you.
Okay.
On both counts.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so when I read the brief, I realized that very quickly we can go into much of the jargon that we use in the space that we operate in, and then we risk losing people. So the intention here is to use common speak, because producers are really, confronted with things often in their own, circumstances, and it's easier, I think, to understand things that are explained in a way that one can understand. So what I've done too with the presentation is I've put some Afrikaans slides in, just in case there's a need to understand things in the mother tongue. I'm going as far as possible to do this in English, but if there are questions in Afrikaans, I can handle them as such. There's no challenge with that. But part of the reason some of the slides are in Afrikaans is because I'm going to be speaking quite a bit of English. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. Sorry. So the first point of the discussion is the role of BEE for both primary agriculture and the value chain's transformation. So in its crudest sense, BEE is a huge alignment exercise. So often we hear the comment that many of the efforts made in development aren't aligned. Well, they are. They align through the BEE codes. Just now, Ilse is going to speak more specifically about the Agri BEE codes. But you know, if one can understand it as a value chain effort of different enterprises operating in the same value chain and getting points from each other's initiatives against the same set of rules, that's effectively what BEE is. Often there are amendments, and one's got to look very carefully at what Agri SA is doing when they make comment on these amendments. One disadvantage with BEE is that we find that much of the legislation isn't written as well as it could have been, and many of the amendments are sometimes found wanting for the way they are written. So it's really key that we work with Agri SA and AgBiz and AFASA and others to be sure that, you know, we exercise our required right and citizenry to make sure that when the amendments do come or when comments are requested, that we indeed participate in that process. So if we want to look at a little bit of history, I'm not going to go into too much jargon, but I think it is helpful to look at the history of how things evolved. So in 1994, obviously, we had a new dispensation. Shortly thereafter, we had something which is not on this sheet, which is called CODESA. Now, often people wonder where the 30% land transfer targets come from. Well, they came from CODESA. So, you know, part of the negotiation around a smooth transition, and in some people's minds, the aversion of a civil war rests in part of the deal that, look, you know, people would be looking at a 30% target for the transfer of land. You know, and much of the frustrations that take place now that one sees boiling over find their roots in that process. There was another really important landmark, and that was in 2003 when the BEE Act was promulgated. Now, this is probably one of the most important documents to come to grips with. Even if you work under a sector charter, the way we do in agriculture. Again, Ilse will explain the sector charter. But the sector charter finds many of its definitions back in the 2003 BEE Act, and you'll see later on my timeline, those get amended in 2013. So again, you know, 2007, the sector charter for Agri was promulgated. I can remember distinctly working with the Milk Producers Association then. They invited an attorney and a group of farmers in a hall, and some of the early details around some of the details that we've now evolved, that have evolved over time. Some of those early details were thrashed out back then already. This is a little known fact that's important for anybody who wants to be compliant or anyone pursuing this journey. The 2008 verification manual that came out and was published by the DTI. Remember, if something is gazetted by the DTI, then we talk about enforceability. And much of the methodology that gets used by verification agents when they verify those who qualify to be verified, again, Ilse is going to talk a little bit about, you know, who should and who shouldn't. But much of that, the definitions find expression in that 2008 verification manual. So if you're becoming a fundi at this and you're really trying to do your homework, please don't neglect to look at that manual. There was a draft amendment to it, which hasn't necessarily been accepted yet, but that manual can be very helpful. And of course, as I said just now, 2013 saw the Act amended. 2016, very, very, very important. The BEE commissioner was installed. She holds the sway in terms of all interpretation. So all along the line here, a lot of interpretation of BEE was kind of left to the consultants. It was left to the beholder. Now we certainly have a common set of interpretive guidelines, and they rest with the BEE commissioner. She doesn't establish policy, she interprets it. So really, really important. Again, as we said over there, we had the BEE codes that were promulgated. Then they were revised in 2017. And then, the generic codes were revised. And then what happens then is our sector codes get revised. And there's a green paper coming out very soon that I would really implore the folks attending here to comment on. Again, it's about good citizenry. If something hasn't been working for you, or if something concerns you, write and comment when it comes out. There was an interesting trend which was of concern to intensive agriculture. That's agriculture like us in the wine industry or the grape industry or various others, that gave equity schemes a little bit of a run for their money. Recently, the minister has clarified that equity schemes aren't something which fall outside of the policy, but really important when we look at the definitions of what is acceptable under the codes for our equity schemes in our farms. We've got to look to what the commissioner interprets as being correct or incorrect or valid or invalid. So I'm going to step off that for a little bit. The next question was to be or not to be. Obviously a play on words from Shakespeare. And I want to make two distinctions that we often don't make. The one being, the benefits of adhering to BEE principles. So anyone can adhere to BEE principles. So you get to help rural people, who in turn become more accepting of you as a business in the rural areas. There's an argument to be made that a lot of security concerns in rural areas can be worked on pretty swiftly by looking at some of the initiatives that one does and whether they adhere to the principles in the BEE Act or not. And then why not explore small, business options, for your employees on farms? I know a lot of producers have the factor endowments to do this. Some producers are on small parcels. Others can, in some instances, look at opportunities. So they're not necessarily getting a scorecard for their production unit. They're not necessarily exploring that, but they are looking at the BEE principles surrounding how you go about this. And then if you plan things well and stick to the same accepted principles in the BEE Act, you get to help your processor, because your processor often is in dire need of 30 or 40 points for their procurement, or in need of other points for their enterprise or supplier development. So it's, if you are too small and you're an exempt micro enterprise, your turnover is under 10 million, it's not to say that there isn't an opportunity to help your off-taker who needs a certificate for them to sell your product, but to help your off-taker with their strategy. And often by doing that, then they are awarded the recognition they need. And then of course there's BEE compliance is where the codes come in, where the scorecard comes in. I'm not going to get into too much detail around the scorecard. The brief is to make things practical. And just now we'll make things practical around the scorecard. But why be compliant? So you've got things like access to new water resources. This goalpost is a little bit different from your conventional level 1 through to level 8 or non-compliance, but it's certainly important that one adheres to the BEE principles when one's looking at any structure that you establish where you're looking at additional water, because I see already that there's new water coming with new dams that are being renovated, and many of the structures that are coming to bear don't adhere to some of the principles of the Act. And then obviously access to markets and preferential trade. We have EU access that some people do on account of their BEE level in our industry. You have license and permits, such as liquor licenses. These are becoming stricter. Just now, Ilse will talk about the process they've been through as PPECB, enforcing, with their enforcement criteria. And she'll add context, as Christo rightly said, that needed context. And then access to soft credit and then the limited amount of grants, of course, is a benefit to compliance. And then your off-taker needs 20 to 40 points from you and from your fellow producers. Sometimes your off-taker is going public, and they are required as public entities to conform to BEE principles. They have to submit their scorecards in order to participate in the JSE. Again, Christo, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with this, but this is your revised 2017 Agri BEE point system. What it really is, how do you come up with a point? Okay, all of these have got a target. And you are, say, perhaps on your, let's say, skills development, your target is 20. Yeah, well, there it is. There's a bonus point of 5, but then there's 25 there. So you take what you are spending and you divide that by your target and you multiply it by the points. It's as simple as that. So there's a set of points that is set up. Those are weighted points for each element. And if you want to exercise quick and dirty analysis of whether, for instance, your procurement or enterprise and supply development, part of that is procurement, where that falls underneath that. You take your target, you look at what you're procuring, you divide your current position by the target, and you multiply it by the points. And there are bonus points on offer and all kinds of little nuances that happen. And then, of course, there are priority elements. But for the purpose of general understanding, that's how this works. And then you're assigned a point for each element. You can't get more than 15 points on socioeconomic development. For example, this, because we find ourselves in rural areas, employing people from poor areas, this has become an important element, this 15 points, and we can talk a little bit about it just now. So that's an Afrikaans slide. Not many people translate the codes, but I found it helpful to explain it in these terms as well. And anyone needing these terms from me are welcome to get those. So practical steps. The next point is practical steps. What are the practical steps without becoming too specific? So on ownership these days, because of the direction the verification of genuine ownership is going in, you need to be a good judge of character. So you can't, please don't go into business with someone that you don't know, don't trust, haven't vetted. And that's really important. So you only partner with people that you've vetted, that you've trusted. In fact, what we request of producers who we consult is that they first spend money, resources, time vetting and finding partners before we get to the sums on whether something is viable or not, because it might be viable. The agricultural economics might make sense, but then very soon, if we were a poor judge of character, and that counts for emerging or commercial, then it falls apart. So modern value chains, furthermore, point 2, can't really afford anymore to carry any elements within them. So one's got to these days seek partners who can add value. And then one's got to keep expectations modest. We often get people coming to us who've been expecting something for 5 years. It hasn't been realized. There's a lot of blaming that happens, and then the cohesion is far worse than it used to be before this project might have been instituted. So this is a really, really big risk. And partner with people who can help lead the capital raising process. So if you go and look for funding, the partner must be with you. It's no longer a case of, closed doors, negotiation, and then, by the way, this might be my beneficiary. That does not work anymore. And then only consider shareholding for employees if you can meet the requirements set out. There's a brochure, a nice brochure that the BEE Commissioner publishes, that I would recommend that anybody look at. If you have an old set of trust deeds you'll probably need to revise them as well. So this is a very scant description of the typical kind of model we find in agriculture. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail. So certain assets typically rest with the commercial partner, certain assets typically rest with the emerging partner, and there's a variation in shareholding ownership, proportion of ownership over here. This is becoming important over here. And then, of course, you know, the actual benefits, and we'll talk about how you define actual benefits just now. But this is more or less a little mini inventory on generally who you find owns what in these businesses. Often you find that the workers' trusts bring political affections and, you know, water rights, etc. And you find that the old producer or the family trust, etc., has, you know, internal complexities of shareholding. On their side, they have erfrecht, next generations with different plans sometimes. And then if they have networks, and they often have skills and credit history, etc. So with your typical model, this all has to be working in harmony, and often we find some challenges with that. So we like to get involved early these days. Now, I said earlier that the commissioner was installed in 2016. She has a look at whether things conform to the 2313 codes or not, and she has very strong opinions on many of them, many of these matters. So you can find this list of things that really bring about true ownership in this set of codes, of course. Code series 100 is what you look for. And by inference, by implication, wat ons kan aflei is that if you adhere to the things that you need to these days, then the onus these days does rest with the black partner to help look for the funding. What I said earlier is it's in the past, there were these conversations perhaps with the bank manager behind closed doors. These days, that does not work. It has to be a joint process of soliciting funding. Another important point, if we're getting practical, is if people are borrowing money to buy into an enterprise, there's this thing called encumbrance or encumbered shares. And there's certain deadlines for payment for one's shares. Let's say you've borrowed from a bank, or you've done whatever you need to do to get the funding. By year 10, effectively, you have to have paid 100% of them. Otherwise, the measured entity who you're buying shares into, their black ownership then becomes a question, and they don't get the points that they need to. For management control now, practical points. Remember, I'm going down the different codes. I still wonder who the Springbok captain is. And, you know, one of the practical tips would be, you know, you will have to let go of decision powers if this management control thing is genuine. So if you're kind of pulling strings from the back, then it's deemed very quickly as a fronting exercise, and there are very, very strict penalties on that. And by implication, therefore, one's got to make sure that one employs the best possible people. I know it's a problem sometimes in rural areas, getting you know, people to work, etc. And we know that all of those concerns are an impediment and a challenge. You know, the skill, the level of skills of people and people's willingness to work in certain areas, etc. But there's nothing we can wish away about this. You know, one has to be sure that the best possible people that we trust, that you trust, that the employee trusts, are involved in your business. And one's got to make people part of the business. And that's just a little, I see I'm running out of time, but that's just a little way of doing that. Practical steps in skills development. If it's not on the black skills matrix or on the Agri CETA priority list, you won't get your points easily. And then there's some thresholds you need to observe. You must monitor whether people are being absorbed or not, especially with bigger businesses. You can train people inside or outside your organization. Just keep the paperwork correct and proper. So a lot of this is about paperwork and making sure that the best possible skills training options are considered. With supplier development, it's your responsibility to collect a valid BE certificate. It's no one else's. So you've got to check that the certificates that are supplied, this is for instance a Vodacom, the top of the Vodacom BE certificate, they are a level 1 contributor. So you'll get very, very good points for your cell phone and data usage. But make sure that these things are valid, and it takes time and it takes someone's efforts either internally or externally to your business. And then work towards a plan. You know, you can't be procuring on the one hand and then just on price, and then there's somebody else trying to do the BEE thing. That's got to all work together. Then proactively ask for certificates. Then with supplier and enterprise development, remember you contract first before you can get the points for helping a supplier or helping an enterprise. If you haven't put a contract in place yet, you can't get those points. And then, you know, there's symbiosis which takes place. So choose beneficiaries where you and the other party benefit. I'm just going to go very quickly now. So what do the levels mean? Well, a level 8 simply means that 10 cents in every rand is counted towards the BEE procurement point. In turn, a level 6 means that 60 cents in every rand is counted towards the BEE point, and so on. And so when someone's getting your BEE certificate, they're looking at those levels basically. And if you are less than 51% Black owned, you're a level 4, except if you are you're a level 2 if you're 51% Black owned. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I misspeak. If you're 51% Black owned till 100%, you're a level 2, and 100% you're a level 1. With socio, these days it must be income generating, and you must have asked the community and done an assessment. And what I implore you to do is to really be active citizens. When policy amendments come out for comment, I would really recommend that people participate with Agri SA. That's it, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. That was very, very insightful. May I ask Emily Hendricks to introduce herself and to do her presentation. Emily, over to you.
Thank you, Crystal. Good morning, everyone. And thanks for having me here today. So I'm going to speak to you a little bit about a few things that Phil has just mentioned in his presentation. And those things really pertain to our skills development, socioeconomic development, productivity, and profitability, as well as sustainability and transformation. So I am just trying to share my screen with you so that you can see my talking points as I go along. Trying, 1 second. I am struggling a little bit here. So I'm going to ask Lebo if she can pull up my slides for me and just put it on the screen for us. Lebo, can you assist me with that, please?
Emily, maybe if you can quickly send it to me, via email, then I can quickly flight it.
Okay, Crystal, I will do that right now. Apologies.
Okay, I'll watch my email on this side. May I ask, are there any questions from anyone that you would like to ask to Phil? Any questions that you would like to ask? Can I have a hand somewhere? Anyone who wants to raise a question specifically directed to Phil?
Thank you, Crystal. I've just shot it through to you. Thank you so much.
Okay. I haven't received it as yet. Let's give it a minute or two. Okay, no questions for Phil at this point in time. Perhaps, Emily, while we wait for your presentation, let me go to Ilse. Ilse, please present yourself, and then we can start with yours, and I'll help Emily on my side. Ilse, over to you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I see I cannot switch my video on, so we'll just bear with that. Let's see if my sharing is going to work with me. Is the presentation visible?
Yeah, it's visible. You can just put it in slide mode. Go ahead, Ilse.
I've got full screen on this side. Okay, so my topic is on the Agri BEE compliance and monitoring. So I'm just going to give a high-level overview just to give the audience a view that it's not always as painful as people think it might be. So as Phil mentioned, there was an amended Agri BEE sector code which came out in 2017. To be precise, it was published on the 8th of December 2017. And in that code, there are various provisions for different sizes of enterprises, as Phil was talking about in his presentation. So enterprises where the total revenue is between 10 million and 50 million, they qualify as a qualifying small enterprise, or the jargon people throw around, or the verification agencies usually say a QSE. So they fall under a QSE scorecard. Black-owned QSEs don't have to be measured. It is, they don't have to go through verification. They can complete an affidavit, which can be found on the DTIC's website, and it just has to be completed and signed in front of a Commissioner of Oaths. And a Commissioner of Oaths, usually at a police station, you'll get a Commissioner of Oaths. Some bank managers are commissioners, as well as attorneys, even some priests. So you just have to take this affidavit that you can find on, if you want to write down the link, by all means. I can also share the presentation, maybe it'll be posted up. You print the affidavit off, fill it in front of the Commissioner of Oaths, get it stamped, and if you are at least 51% Black owned or 100% Black owned, you will get your level. As Phil was saying, 51% Black owned is a level 2, 100% Black owned is a level 1. Then we talk about enterprises which have total revenue which are less than 10 million. And these are classified as exempted micro enterprises. And the jargon there is the EME. So the EME will enjoy a deemed recognition level of a level 4 if there is less than 51% Black ownership. So same principle, there is an affidavit on the DTIC's website, print it off, take it to a Commissioner of Oaths, fill all your information in, Commissioner stamps it, off we go, sorted. So Black EMEs and QSEs automatically qualify for, as I said, level 1 for those that are 100% Black owned, and a level 2 for those between 51 and less than 100. So if an EME is less than 51% Black owned, it will automatically achieve a level 4. If a QSE, which is the 10 to 50 million rand one, is less than 51% Black owned, it will need to undergo a verification audit by an agency to determine what its level is. So if a business wants to get a better level than what the affidavit can give them automatically, for example, you're an EME that has an automatic level 4, you can undergo a verification audit by a SANAS accredited verification agency if you want a better level and you believe that you can achieve a better level rather than just the automatic one that you'll be getting. And in particular, this might be the case if the business wants to bid for some government business. I know in certain tenders they have particular BE levels that they require, or they may be requested to have a certain BE level by clients. And Phil mentioned that as pertains to the EU with his clients. Large businesses, so those are the ones with turnover greater than 50 million. They will need to undergo an annual verification audit by a SANAS accredited verification agency. And please ensure that the verification agency is accredited by SANAS. Otherwise, the certificate is not going to be worth anything. The verification agencies are actually listed on SANAS's, the ones that are active and can issue certificates are listed on SANAS's website. So where the PPCB came in on the enforcement guideline side is obviously we are the Perishable Products Export Control Board. So there were enforcement guidelines issued in 2019 in which state-owned entities needed to determine what the level of BBBEE compliance within their respective industries was. So remember, the amended codes came out in 2017. There was a 2-year gap and these enforcement guidelines came out. And it's about 2 years now. And now we've sent out communication just to ask customers to provide their BE levels by the 1st of December. This information will be consolidated in an aggregated manner. So we won't say farm XYZ based in Ceres producing apples has this level. We'll say in primary production of our customer base, these are the primary production units and X% have BE compliance. So we won't be giving any personal information away, we'll be aggregating the information. And this has to be reported through to DALAD. The intent of this exercise is purely to establish a benchmark level of compliance within the agricultural export chain. To date, there is no overview or no sight of the level of compliance. So we are trying to establish to what degree our export chain is BE compliant. Doesn't mean that we're stopping exports. We just need to see where are we so that we have a benchmark this year and we can compare it. Are we getting more compliant, less compliant, staying the same? And as can be seen from the previous slides, a verification audit does not always have to be done. Because we understand, verification audits cost money. And for smaller businesses, affidavits can be completed and thereby the BE compliance is done. So that is my 2 cents worth. I was quick and easy.
Thank you, Ilse. That was quite quick. Thank you very much for that. I am going to, there's Emily's document, and I'm going to throw it on the screen as well. Emily, over to you. Let me just put it on slide mode. There you go. Emily, over to you.
Thank you, Crystal, and apologies to the audience for that mishap over there. And so now you have heard Ilse from a compliance perspective, you've heard Phil from a more regulatory perspective, digging into the codes and giving you that information on how best one can go about interpreting and applying the codes. So From my side, I'm going to look at the terminology that we use on a daily basis amongst each other as farmers, farm workers, and to see how we can bring those together within the codes and at the same time make it practical and let it serve its purpose in the advancement of bringing marginalized communities into the economic space in the agriculture sector. So the first one I'm going to talk to is our productivity and profitability. Now, productivity and profitability is very, very closely aligned with our skills development. That is the heart of how we achieve our productivity and then subsequently our profitability. Now, when we focus on the skills development, the most important aspect for us there is to be strategic about it, have a plan, know your workers, understand their potential. And then from that point, we have to then look at what skills do we want to develop? Where do we want to take worker X in the value chain of the business? And once we have ascertained that, we will then come up with skills development plans that actually serves the agriculture community as well as our businesses as a whole. And the beauty about this skills development that automatically adds to our productivity is it also feeds into the other elements of our BEE scorecard. For example, if I started out as a worker, general worker on the farm, and now I get the opportunity to do NQF3, NQF4, and then I get to do a diploma. Over time, I can transition into a more senior role in the business, and that would automatically answer our question on management control, because we will have those young Black managers coming through the ranks, and person would have graduated through all those levels. And in that also, you have the benefit as the business to have someone in your management who actually appreciates your culture, understands the business, and can immediately add value. So instead of having to go outside to recruit a middle manager or a senior manager, you over time build the people within the business after having identified them with their capabilities, and then slowly move them through the ranks. And that also helps with sustainable management, because people coming through the ranks like that, they are very likely to stay with the business for a longer period. And even so, should they decide to leave, you would have added your value to the sector as a whole, because you would be sending someone out into the agriculture sector who is far more developed than what they were when they started in the business. And together with all of those developments, workers then become more proud, they speak out, they want to be a part of. And in doing so, they come up with innovative ideas on how things can be done efficiently, differently. And so you tap into their skills on that level as well. And then that also builds the cohesion in the business, because when workers feel they can make a suggestion, whether it's implemented or not, it is being heard, it is being discussed, it is being unpacked. They have that greater loyalty, and they want to be there, not just for a job, but they feel part of a family. And then with the mechanization that is almost inevitable for some of the sectors in the agriculture space, for some of the businesses in the agriculture space, pardon me, we obviously have to acknowledge that as well. However, again, as we develop the skills and we have a strong labor force, the two can coexist in that environment. It does not have to be the one replacing the other, especially in instances where the possibility of coexistence of a highly skilled labor force together with mechanization and great innovation can coexist, right? And that in itself will then also improve the efficiencies, and mechanization in that way would help you to do things more agile, more quickly, and add to the efficiency of the outputs. Right, So that it as a whole then speaks to our productivity, our profitability, and how skills development can feed into that, and at the same time also feed into our scorecards. One last point I want to make on that is you have Emily, who's now become a senior manager. And then one day she decides, I don't want to be a manager anymore. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to render services to this business. And then there you go. You have an opportunity to develop an enterprise, which then become your supplier over time. And that's your preferential procurement aspects also dealt with there at the same time. And in doing so, you open the market for more competitive, to make it a more competitive environment, new entrants coming into the space, and that's how we add to the scorecards of our own, as well as the economic inclusion of in our sector. And then when we move to our next slide, we look at transformation and sustainability. Now, again, in transformation and sustainability, skills development is again one of the key drivers there. As much as we sometimes think transformation, equity share, shareholding, share of my business, it does not always have to go that way. The transformation really just speaks to, I have contributed to the development of a person or a business from where it was to where it is now in a more economically sound space. And this is sustainable, and this opens new markets, this brings new entrants, and that kind of transformation, it has to be done in a sustainable way. So a flippant example I want to use, for example, on equity shares. Overnight, we find an equity partner, which is not ideal. We enter into an agreement, there's a share scheme, and off you go. That is not sustainable. And the sustainable way would be, as Phil mentioned, know your partner. Make sure this is what you want to do. Have you spoken to the community? Is that what they want? Is there something else that they could potentially get greater benefit of? Right? So we have to interrogate all those space, all those opportunities. And the legislation has made it important, compulsory that there must be a needs analysis done. So in the transformation activities, we need to make sure that in writing, the recipients of that contribution or of that opportunity has indicated that this is what we need, because this is how it's going to impact on our lives. So we don't go and just transform the way we think it should be. We need to transform in the way that the community's needs are aligned with that activity. So that brings me then to the next point of socioeconomic development. That is the essence of making that developmental shift. So the society, you develop them economically, and that has to be done also in a sustainable way. So socioeconomic development can range from you contributing to the creche around the corner, and now the school becomes an economically viable space where they can sustainably continue to render that service. And then we also look at various small enterprises that can be developed from that aspect. And when we look at those small enterprises, first of all, they will not necessarily be a service provider to us or a supplier to us, because it's an enterprise down the road that needs I always use the bakery down the road that needs an oven and an extractor fan. And we contribute that to that business. And as the business settles and grows and develops, they become a supplier to us in terms of providing fresh bread for the workers on a daily basis. And that enterprise have now graduated to a supplier, and therein lies your bonus points that you can then at the end of the day claim in respect of your BEE or socioeconomic development element. So all of this then feeds into each other. With the skills development, You add value to a school where high school learners are, and they go to college, they do a diploma in agriculture, they come back as your intern or your graduate, and through your skills development programs within the business, you transform that person further in a sustainable way. And that's how that person then becomes an employee, or he becomes an entrepreneur, and that is your contribution over time. And yes, it may sound like there's a lot of work that needs to go in here, but we'll break it down to small bite chunks, and then you'll see, if we look at all the elements, there are various opportunities that consist as low-hanging fruit in my view. So you can develop your supplier, you can develop an enterprise through your socioeconomic development activities. And yes, it is not going to materialize overnight, because when you do the socioeconomic development investment, it has to sit there and develop further. Then it becomes an enterprise. Again, it's time. Then it becomes a supplier. So to become BEE compliant, or to have that ideal rating that one would look to, we have to be patient with ourselves and true to the process and say, I'm going to give myself the next 3 years to get to a level 8 or a level 7 or whatever the level is. And within those 3 years, we will look at all the elements, look at what we have, look at our human capital and their capabilities, look at our community, and therein we can identify our socioeconomic development opportunities, our enterprise development opportunities, that then becomes our suppliers, and that is how we feed into our preferential procurement as well. And with that, what we're doing, we'll be transforming those individuals to become economically viable in a sustainable way. We will be opening the markets for more competitiveness, because we're introducing new service providers into that space. And then lastly, I'm looking at skills development and socioeconomic development. Just as I mentioned earlier, it is important, excuse me, please. It is important for us to remember that our learnerships, our bursaries, our ABAC programs, our graduate placements and internships, they all work together. But again, it is a matter of having that strategy very clear and making sure that I know my workers, I know their potential, I know who can go on ABAC, who should be going on ABAC, I know who should be going on a learnership, who can qualify for a bursary, because the person will be able to manage that. And then we're looking at our internships from our candidates that we sponsored at universities. Now, all of these programs are co-funded by the Agri BEE. There is a stipend for all of these. So it is important that we delve into them one by one and understand what is the stipend, what is the requirements, who are the people on my farm who can actually participate in that. Or I look outside and say, at the university, at Elsenburg College, there are so many learners with from disadvantaged backgrounds who could benefit from a bursary. Because on my farm at the moment, my workers are not there yet. They're still on ABED or they're busy with learnerships. They will get there, but for now, I will split the pie and I will invest at Elsenburg for 3 bursaries, and the rest I will apply in my business to make sure my candidates go through their learnerships and through their ABEDs. And at the same time, I claim my refunds from the Agri BEE. Now, the workplace skills plan, I have noticed over the last 3 years of my being in the sector that sometimes it is largely focused on skills that is immediately needed to do the work, right? So that is your compulsory training that is happening on a daily basis. That's great, but that is not where it should end. We should widen the circle and bring in more training that can develop the person to become that kind of worker that we can take through the ranks and end up at management control, or end up as an entrepreneur, which become a supplier to us in the end. And that's why it's important to have that strategic view around the training, making sure that when people go on learnerships, there's an end goal with that. There's a path that they need to follow. It's not just a once-off thing and off we go. So we have that 3-year plan for each one of them, especially where they have also shown a great interest in wanting to develop themselves. Now, having spoken about that, I'll come back to the very first slide with the 2 circles. And as you can see, with the codes, we look at our skills development, we look at our enterprise supplier development, we look at our socioeconomic development, management control, right? All of those elements feed gently into these topics. And it is things that we can do on a daily basis. 1, important for us to have a strategy in terms of our training. 2, important to know our workers, what their capabilities are. And then 3rd, have that driver that actually follows through with the AgriSETA, because it is not an overnight conversation either. Many companies tap into the AgriSETA, so we have to be tenacious and continuously follow up to make sure that our workers get the benefits that are due to them. So from a productivity perspective, our skills development, our drivers, that feeds into profitability, and that brings about the sustainable transformation. And there we have our socioeconomic development that really helps us to develop those enterprises that then become our suppliers. And there we are with our preferential procurement, we're opening markets and making sure that more people of other demographics comes into the agriculture space and become competitive on all levels. So that is my little input to this discussion this morning. You're more than welcome to ask questions if you have any, and I'm always able to assist if necessary.
Thank you very much, Emily, for a very insightful presentation. May I ask, is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Anyone, you're more than welcome. Just put up your hand and I'll give you an opportunity to ask a question. I see nothing here in the chat box as yet. Anyone? Right. Whilst we wait for people to share any of their views with us, may I ask Phil, especially Ilse as well, to comment on each other's presentation and to expand a bit. Phil, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Christo. I had a conversation with Ilse yesterday, and before I had that conversation, part of my intention was to look a little bit at the correspondence that we recently saw from PPECB. And, you know, I was just saying to her that there was a little bit of unfortunate Twitter sphere activity which exacerbated things which weren't accurate. And, you know, I think with these things, we really need to take a deep breath and get behind what the specific request is that any agribusiness or any SOE might be asking of us. And as she said, the correspondence was merely asking for a status check. It wasn't asking for compliance by the 1st of December or anything of the sort. And what my concern is that often you find conservative producers tend to hold back and not want to submit what they have, whereas many times you'll find those level 4 affidavits or those workers' trusts where there's at least a level 8 or 6 or whatever it might be, can be quite helpful to everyone at PPCB or everyone in the fruit industry, as they basically establish a pretty accurate baseline. So nothing in the enforcement guidelines, directly enforces compliance on farm level. But what it does is it encourages entities like PPCB to say, well, let's do as anyone else does who's doing their own scorecard or their certification. Let's request people's BE certificates. So I'm very glad that she dealt with that, and I'm hoping that moving forward, there'll be clarity on how this works. And it was a pretty good test case, I think. And you'll probably find more and more of that, where people will have to communicate such a request, and it can be deemed to be sensitive, but it's not necessary for it to invoke any panic.
Thank you, Phil. I see there's a couple of comments. Somebody asked whether we can see the website for the affidavit again. And I think people have then posted the links in the chat box. So anyone interested in those affidavits, you can just click on those links and you'll be able to access it. Then there's a question from Sini from Food for Mazanzi. She asked the question, will we be able to access these presentations after the webinar? Phil, will you be able to share yours? Emily and Ilse, can I just get a heads up?
No problem.
No problem. I'll send it off to Lebogang.
Please share it with Lebogang. Anyone that are interested in these must just contact Lebogang. Then my question that I want to ask Phil, and I'm a big proponent of, a review of the current BEE, Agri BEE regulatory framework, is that why are farmers' contribution towards the skills levy, towards statutory levies, and so forth, why is it being excluded from this exercise? Because I think the contribution that many farming entities make towards skills levies can easily be or can easily constitute a contribution to training or socioeconomic development. Any answer to that?
I think a lot of the, views in the eyes of the drafters of the codes, and of course of subsequent revisions, are that these codes need to be over and above what is deemed to be a universal tax. And we often get into this debate around industry levies. So with industry levies, there are two ways of handling them. You either deduct them from your measurable total, or you count them as socioeconomic development contributions. But if I can just veer into that space for a second, because it's one that we know well. So you find industry organizations like ourselves or others are required by the National Agricultural Marketing Council to basically delineate their spending in a 60% enterprise development, 28% skills development. No, beg your pardon, but the proportion, I forget for a second, the proportion is not all socioeconomic development. It's definitely 60% enterprise development. And I know that Agri SA and AgBiz are leading a process where one might in future get what we call a practice note. You currently have a guidance note, a practice note, where verification agents get to count those contributions in the proportions that are relevant or that are more accurate, so that a producer paying levies is paying for enterprise development and not being deemed to be paying only for socioeconomic development. I doubt, quite frankly, whether the levy contribution on the SDL will very soon be counted in, for the reason that it's deemed to be a general requirement for everybody, and it's not over and above the statutory requirement. Whereas a levy, and I bring these two examples together for a reason, a levy gets decided upon by a majority of any subsector. So every few years, every 4 years in most cases, enterprises will approach the NAMC, the National Agricultural Marketing Council, and request a renewal of their levy or statutory measures. And so that act does provide leeway in that it's the farmers or the enterprises within a certain subsector coming and saying, we want this levy. Whereas your skills development levy is one which is basically imposed upon you. So I think that's the tension between the two examples. Frankly, I think you've got a better chance of getting a practice note in the future around the enterprise development than you do around the skills one. But that's just my opinion. Others might have a different one.
Thank you, Phil, Ilse, and Emily. Any comments?
I agree with Phil. The skills development levy, that is imposed by SARS essentially, and we have to pay that over. So that is supposed to be spent purely on the skills development component. And as Emily was talking about in her presentation, as long as we submit a workplace skills plan and an annual training review, which is basically looking at the training that's been completed, a percentage of your skills development levy is a mandatory payback. So you will get a percentage of that money paid back as long as you have submitted your WSP and your ATR and it's been accepted by your CETA. Another good one to check is also which CETA are you registered with? Because in agriculture, sometimes, you know, we register with Agri CETA, or some of our producers or processing facilities might register with Food and Bev. So you could be submitting your WSP and ATR to the incorrect CETA and thereby not getting your mandatory grants paid back. So that's another hint to check, and make sure that the SDLs, which CETA it's going to, so that you can claim back from the correct CETA. And as Emily was saying, let's reinvest what we get back in terms of the mandatory payments and use that for further skills development. I see Phil's got his hand.
Phil?
Yeah, look, you know, I would certainly echo Emily's sentiments around the work-based skills plan. I think it is a lost opportunity. And I think there's a huge amount of A, recognition, and B, valuable big data that can be gathered around the sector's skill priorities. So often we complain that the sector is not focusing on the right stuff, or that, you know, that government doesn't want to grant us points for the kinds of training that we deem works better. And yet our enterprises often struggle to submit these work-based skills plans. Now, the work-based skills plan is a mandatory thing if you're above 500,000 payroll and above a certain threshold of number of employees. So you have to have a work-based skills plan, and then you keep that in your drawer, but then the submission is basically a separate exercise which speaks to your work-based skills plan. So you find that the plan is often neglected, or it's filled in a very scant way. There's not a lot of thought into it. I think you'd be in a very powerful position if you could automate that process of the work-based skills plan, or, you know, invigorate people to do it properly if they got something back from that. And it confounds many of us that often people don't capitalize on the funding that they might get back if they submit the report against their work-based skills plan.
Thank you, Phil. And I think that is a big concern because the low levels of submission of WSPs, work skills plans, is a great concern, especially for the CETAs. There's too few companies that annually submit it, because that's money you get back to do training. And I think that is perhaps an opportunity for us to create greater awareness around that. Emily, over to you.
Thank you, Crystal. And to follow Anil's point again, collaboration in the agriculture sector with regards to skills development can go a long way in terms of achieving that transformation and professionalization of the agri workers. One example that Phil and I spoke about last night is when we pull 3 farms together, how much have you received from your workplace skills plan? And we pull the money together and then either bring it out to an institution where agricultural students are studying in the agriculture sector, or invest it back into a business and then create those environments where if you do not get large chunks of money back from your workplace skills plan, or you don't have large chunks of money in your budget, you collaborate with other individuals in the sector. And as we said yesterday, it's important to have that integration between people at the different farming institutions. For example, when laws have the HR manager from, let's say, United Exports collaborated with Carsten's HR or whoever else is in the sector. So that kind of collaboration can bring larger impact when we look at skills development and the limited resources we have available. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, so there's another question here at the bottom. Let me see, that's from Pete Citrus. If your company belongs to a member organization, such as Agri SA or commodity organization like WinPro, will their BEE status also contribute to your company's scorecard? Anyone would like to answer that? It's in the chat box. Paul?
Yeah, if there's a fee, yes, you will, because it's a service you're procuring. And we have an annual BE verification. In fact, we're busy doing that now. We work on the same scorecard, interestingly, as PPCB. And so, you know, if you are procuring from WinPro, our services, you count 50% of your procurement spend towards your scorecard. So 50 cents in every rand that you pay WinPro for services or for membership, you can count towards your scorecard on the grounds that we have a BE score.
Okay, so Pete, there's a good answer for you. Emily, is that an old hand? Nowadays they talk about legacy hands.
It is a legacy hand, Crystal. I'm taking it down right now.
Excellent. Okay, so colleagues, let me just check if there's any other questions that anyone would like to ask. You're more than welcome. But I think what we will do from our side is we will make sure that we provide you with these presentations. We will also provide you with perhaps a document, an easy guide, so that anyone who's interested in pursuing this can follow the guide and know exactly you know, what and how they should go about to achieve a particular BE status. So that's the second thing that I want to emphasize. And then the third thing that I would like to also note is that we continuously engage with the department on this issue. As I say, for me, you know, a farmer must get recognition for all of the contributions that they make. Farmers should not be in any way penalized, because whether you're compliant with BEE or not, you still contribute to the country's economy through your taxes that you pay, through the workers that you employ, and through a whole range of other activities that all contribute to a local economy. But at the same time, given the fact that here's an opportunity to grow your business, I think we will provide the necessary guidance from our side. Lebogang is online. Lebogang, any final comments from your side? And we have to wrap up. Lebogang? Okay, so what Lebogang says here in the chat box, that I need to just share with the audience, if there's an appetite for more workshops, and this is more in-depth workshops, they must contact the provincial unions or commodity organizations, and we as Agri SA, we will assist with that. Currently, Lebogang and myself, we are on the one hand busy with the labor unions at the AAMP process, and at the same time, we're busy with this as well. So we literally cut ourselves into two pieces. My wife says that I'm nowadays big enough and round and fat. I can even cut myself into more pieces. So ladies and gentlemen, on that high note, I would like to thank you for your participation today. We will certainly, via Lebogang's office, make sure that you get access to the necessary information. But if there's any attempt to institute punitive measures that is draconian in nature and that will in any way impact or harm the industry, please don't hesitate to contact Agri SA, because it's our role to engage with government and to ensure that sense and common logic prevails. So thank you very much for a good morning, and I trust that you will have an enjoyable festive season and that you'll all remain safe. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.